And I can use the weird, like I want it to sound like chocolate raindrops. And he's like, oh, I know what you're talking about.
Hey, Bass family. Welcome back to Sounds Like Ben. I've got a special treat in store for you today. Down at the 2020 NAMM show, I caught Damian Erskine's performance at the Bass Bash and was able to line up an interview with him, catching up with what he's got going on. Now, if you're not familiar with Damian Erskine, you should definitely check out his solo work. You can also check out the albums he's recorded with the Peter Erskine New Trio. Yes, there's an Erskine relationship there. You can also hear him on Beluga, which is an album by Architecture of the Absurd, which is kind of like a sits somewhere between Mr. Bungle and Frank Zappa. It's just super cool stuff. And of course, he also works with Gino Vanelli. So I guess suffice to say, Damian's got a wide range of gigs and activities. Now, before we get into it, make sure you hit like and gently touch the subscribe button so you can get notified when new videos from the channel come out. All right, here's the interview. Sweet. All right, so yeah, it was great seeing your set and seeing you again at Bass Bash. Always a pleasure. And yeah, thanks for taking the time. It was also interesting to learn that you lived in the Bay Area for a while. You were
Yeah.
you said Marin area?
Yeah,
North?
I lived in Fairfax for a little 4 or 5 years.
Cool. So I guess starting there, you've been in Portland now almost 15 years? Something like that, you said?
16 now, and
What?
moved here May of 2004.
Cool. So how do you deal with the challenges of not living in New York or Nashville or Los Angeles? And what do you think are maybe the advantages that you're getting on the other end of that?
Well, I haven't found many disadvantages, to be honest. Portland's kind of it finds a sweet spot, I've found, which is why I've been here for so long. My biggest issue in the Bay Area, aside from the traffic, was the cost of living. In Portland, I'm a homeowner, and my mortgage is less than I was paying to live above a liquor store in Fairfax, which was far less than we would have been paying if we were most anywhere else in the Bay Area, because we had a pretty good deal. And so, at least in Portland, Portland's a unique city in as much as there's a real wealth of quality players and enough places to play that you can actually make a living playing music here, and the cost of living is quite a bit lower than in New York or LA or San Francisco. I go down to LA enough that I've often wondered if I shouldn't just move down there, because the scene is pretty great. There's so many phenomenal players, all kinds of sessions and jingles, although I think there's a lot less of that these days than there used to be, but still there's a lot of good creative music happening. But when I look at the cost of living, and everybody's pretty much making the same money there that they are here, but they're spending twice as much to be there, I'd rather just buy a plane ticket and spend a couple hours getting there and do my thing and come back home. And Portland's a beautiful place to be too, so it's kind of the best of all worlds as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful city. I've been through there. Actually, got my dog from Oregon, one of my dogs. So traveled through there, and it was great. Yeah.
That said, I mean, if I would, I've lived. This is actually my 13th state. I've moved around quite a bit, and I didn't find this kind of balance in most any other place. A lot of the smaller cities I lived in, like Raleigh, North Carolina, or different places like that, were a little trickier because there really was only one or two guys that had all of the gigs, and there wasn't a whole lot of room for other people to come in and carve out a little bit of a niche for themselves. Thankfully, these days we live in the era of YouTube. So we always have fantastic people to study with and lots of information at our fingertips. But as far as actually gigging, especially if you're not near a city center, it can sometimes, I think, you just need to up and move, which is what I did until I found the place that resonated with me.
Mm. I noticed when I looked at your calendar on your website, you are always busy, which is good, right? And
Yeah.
you perform in a wide variety of settings, both on recording and live, right? So your solo work and your work with Peter Erskine's New Trio, that skews more jazz. But you also work with Gino Vanelli, and you have a lot of kind of funk and soul gigs, and even you're a member of the Architecture of the Absurd, the Beluga.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you think about the range of situations and range of drummers and, and all excellent, right? I mean, Marco Miniman and Peter Erskine and Vinny and just, it's amazing. So I imagine that wide variety is part of keeping yourself busy. But one of the things that came to my mind is how do you prepare yourself to adapt to all of those different situations?
My whole goal growing up, I never aspired to be any kind of artist on my own or, a bass superstar or anything like that. My whole goal growing up was just to make a living playing music because it was what I enjoyed most in life. So I thought if I can turn this into some kind of living, and to that end, I grew up watching Peter play, and I grew up watching Peter play in all kinds of different environments. Whether it was, it was mostly jazz related, but then, Steely Dan, and, he's done a little bit, Elvis Costello, he's played with everybody, Joni Mitchell. So in my mind, the consummate musician and professional was versatile. And my whole goal growing up was just to try and learn how to be a musical chameleon. Partially because I thought it would give me a broader understanding of music, but also because I thought it would make me more employable. So that's when I'm preparing for gigs. To me, music is music, and like the old saying goes, "There's only two types of music: good and bad." And when I'm preparing for a gig, I'm really just trying to play that music as well as I can in the way it should be played. And I can't do it all. There are some rock gigs I've stepped in for a minute and, did an album with Paul Gilbert and a few things, and I had a blast, but I realized, and I think he probably realized because he didn't use me for the tour, that I realized I'm not a rock bass player. Like, I haven't done that enough. And it isn't a part of my vocabulary. So I never felt entirely comfortable, and I think the track sounded good and everything, but it just, wasn't the right fit. So, I had to decide whether I wanted to try and make that a part of my vocabulary, and I realized it wasn't really something I was that interested in doing. I kind of found my things that I enjoy, so I've just narrowed the scope a little bit. But, being honest with yourself about what you can do and what you can't do. And there are a lot of gigs that people have offered me that I've passed on to other people, because immediately in my mind I think, man, I would do all right, but this player over here would kill it. He would just crush it. You would dig this guy more. So yeah, I try and be honest with myself about what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, what I can do, what I can't, and then just do the best job I can, no matter what it is.
That's cool. It's a good perspective. With that said, what do you think is kind of different about your maybe set of influences or experiences than your contemporaries that you're playing with?
Interesting.
If you've gone into it, I guess maybe giving an example, if you've gone into a situation, and we all have common vocabulary in what we listen to, right? But then we also have things that aren't part of that common vocabulary, right? That maybe were a big influence on us that are outside of that situation. What would that be for you?
The things that are different with me. I kind of came into music, it feels like, from the opposite direction of everybody else. Interestingly, when I was very young, I saw Peter, my uncle, play with everybody, like I mentioned, Weather Report, tons of Jocko stuff, and Brecker Brothers and all that kinds of stuff in New York. But then I was also being raised by a single mother who was either working or in school, and so there wasn't a lot of music in the house, generally speaking. I was kind of a TV kind of kid for a lot of years, and I didn't discover a lot of music that everybody knew until college. I'd never heard the Beatles until college. different things like that. So my understanding of music was kind of academic for a long time. I had always played it, but I'd always just done what my teachers told me to do. So I learned how to read and I learned all my scales, but I never really played music with other people until college. And that's when I kind of changed directions and went from being more of a metal drummer to more of a jazz bass player, because it made more sense in the college setting, and then I kind of fell in love with it. But my understanding of music was entirely academic. I could read anything you set in front of me, but I didn't know blues changes. I didn't know how to come up with a bass line. So I spent a lot of time later on plugging the gaps that a lot of people took for granted, just learning how to listen to a track and figure out the bass line, or sit with a drummer and come up with a groove. All that stuff that is more intuitive for people, I had to kind of teach myself, which is a big part of the reason I didn't do well in music school. I didn't understand the vernacular, and there was a lot of just gaping holes in my developmental foundation. So I basically dropped out and taught myself. I kind of started from the ground up. In an academic way, but I also made it a point to pursue and take every gig I could get my hands on, whether I got my butt kicked or not, because I knew I needed to learn, and that was the best way to learn. So in a sense, I mean, that's the thing that pops into my mind, is what might be different in my perspective of music, is that I just learned it differently than most people early on, and then kind of most people come to the academic later and then tie it to what they already know via their ears. I did the opposite.
Did that early academic training, did that come from, being in, a traditional orchestra or band, or did it come from training from, I think I heard in another interview that your grandfather was a pretty big influence on that. Where did that training come from?
Yeah, both. My grandfather kind of forced me to start playing bass when I was 6. And I never really liked it, but it was just one of those things I had to do. It was like doing my chores. I had to, empty the dishwasher and then practice bass for an hour, and then I could play. And because of that, I also got a lot of playing in school and a lot of reading time, because nobody in junior high school, who in 5th grade, what 5th grade program has a bass player that can read, sight read music and stuff like that. So I was kind of forced to be in all the bands, and I have all my little, trophies, most outstanding, 1979,
That's funny.
So I did a lot of that. That was kind of the only real world training I had, was reading music in the school bands. But yeah, my grandfather sat me down and he would buy me all the play along books, the Music -1, Jamie Aebersold books, and I remember him bringing home Eddie Gomez, Mark Johnson bass solo transcriptions that he'd have me learn, and Donald Fagen play along books and stuff like that. So yeah, he was a very big influence, and he was kind of the whip cracker. He would check on me, have me play everything that I'd been working on after my hour of practice, and he really made me do it.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. It's probably didn't feel cool at the time. It was cool in retrospect, right?
I fought him tooth and nail every step of the way, and he always told me, he said, "One day you're going to thank me for this," and I said, "No way, this is torture." And then lo and behold, I did thank him much later on.
So, I'm thinking about that. Is there advice that, knowing what you know now, that you would have given yourself I think a lot about that kind of crucial period as you were entering into college. That had to be a really big change, both in terms of genre and instrument at the same time. What advice would you give yourself, your 18-year-old self, I guess?
The thing that I was lacking was I didn't love what I was doing, because I was never working on anything that I loved. I would tell myself to go back and just take all the music that you like and learn it, figure it out, and figure out those bass lines, and just have fun playing along. For me, I didn't discover how fun music could be until I started kind of doing it on my own after the fact. And I firmly believe that, when we're in the shed, if we're emotionally invested in whatever it is we're working on, because we love the tune, or we love that bass line, or we want to sound like that, or whatever it is. We'll work on it for longer. We'll put more intention into that thing, and we'll get more out of it. My only regret was that I spent so long just doing the nuts and bolts scales and kind of monotonous stuff. Although I am so glad that I got that stuff under my fingers earlier and later. So, but I would encourage myself to find a balance. And most of my students now that I have to encourage them to find the balance, because the inverse is true. They only play the stuff that they want to play, and they only just jam along to recordings, and they never sit there with intention and really work out modes and scales and arpeggios and figure out, learn their fretboard and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I mean, that brings up a good point. In addition to your performing career, right, you have a lot of experience as an author with Right Hand Drive and The Improviser's Path, and as an educator and columnist, so No Trouble and columns for other magazines, as well as I believe you're on the faculty at Portland State University.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. What do you find that your students who are accelerating towards their goals, progressing at the fastest pace, what do you think it is that they're doing differently from the others?
Loving what they do. When you fall in love with the process and the results, you start seeing the fruits of your labors, and you kind of get hooked on it a little bit. It's kind of like when you first start working out and you realize you got a little bit of a bulge there, and you say, okay, I'll just do a few more reps.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of get excited about that process. And the ones who really excel are the ones who really love what they're doing. And that's why I think it's important to discover what it is you love about music. And I try and get a lot of my students to project into the future a little bit and think about what kind of player they want to be when, 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it is, and kind of reverse engineer that process and kind of have a goal in mind, a little bit of an end game in mind. So when you're in the shed, you can be a little more focused, and you can also realize that you're really working towards something. You're not just running scales because somebody told you to run scales. Mm-hmm. You're running them because you want to learn your fretboard, or you want to learn how to play over changes, or whatever it is. You kind of know why you're doing what you're doing. So it's more impactful because you put more intention into it.
Yeah, it's the start with the why.
Yeah.
I know that there was a public speaker who that's his thing, and I can't remember which one now. But anyway, I understand the point, and it's something good to keep in mind, right? The motivation behind what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, here we are at the start of a new decade, right? How do you feel that your writing and playing has changed over the last 10 years? And maybe to turn that back on you with a little bit of projecting, what are the areas that you're looking to develop over the next coming years?
The way in which I've changed is that I'm much less fear-based than I used to be. I used to be terrified of making a mistake, and terrified of not sounding good, and terrified of not sounding like a jazz guy on the jazz gigs, or a Latin guy on the Latin gigs, doing all that thing. I was just so hypercritical of myself that I couldn't relax and just do what I thought I should do to the best of my ability. Now, I don't know if it's because I've had enough kind of high pressure tours and gigs that I was nervous about that I actually survived and did well on, or what. But now I'm comfortable with my strengths and my weaknesses. I feel like I know myself better. I know my playing better. And I allow myself room to be human, and I'm not as scared to mess up. And I'm not as concerned about other people's, opinions on whether I'm flashy enough or interesting enough. And I'm finally gotten comfortable with the way I play, and that I play the way I play, and I'll always do the best that I can. I'm not going to be able to do that thing like this player or that thing like this player, but I can do me, and I finally feel comfortable being me, which gives me the freedom to just relax and have fun with the music, and not sweat the small stuff so much. My goals for the next 10 years. I've actually been thinking about this a lot. I spend so much of my time either playing music on a stage or in a studio, or preparing music for that stage or that studio, or talking about music with students, that I've kind of gotten sick of music. I realized that I don't listen to it in the car anymore. I don't listen to it recreationally anymore. It's just an active, when I'm listening, it's because I have to actively listen to something. I kind of want to fall in love with it again and just have fun with it again. So I've been kind of actively seeking out new music and what's some new stuff I haven't checked into. And I found myself listening to Billie Eilish last night, just because I was like, I really like that tune. And like, I'm not concerned whether it's some heady jazz thing or some deep thing I need to get into. I'm just like, that's a great tune. I'll check out the rest of the album. And just having fun with it, with like no boundaries, no anything, just like discovering the childlike wonder of music again is kind of my goal. And I think that'll likely have a fairly profound effect on my playing, in one way or another. I'm curious to see how it does affect my playing.
That's cool. I have a friend who is he's very into the world of electronic music, and it wasn't typically my thing, right? But as he's exposed me to more, I've found kind of like, oh, well, that I really like, right?
Yeah.
And what's the difference between what I like and what I don't like, right? And understanding some of that to kind of develop my sound, but also just to enjoy it. I mean, for whatever reason, Selena Gomez has my number, right? Like, like she puts something, I'm like, I'm gonna have a good I like it,
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So you, or a little bit earlier, you spoke about trying to kind of nail certain styles, and it's definitely clear that a part of what you do is you would see a Latin influence, right, in some of the songs on your early solo albums, or you'd be guesting on something that had more of a flamenco influence or something like that. And I was thinking about Spotify's launch last year in India, right, and the idea of essentially billions more people, right, coming into the space and sharing music, right?
Yeah.
And I was wondering, what do you think that the impact that's going to have on the role of bass, right? And maybe that's a give and take in listening and in playing.
Yeah, I mean, with the injection of any new informations, everything changes, or at least shifts just a little bit. I didn't know that Spotify had launched in India. I'm curious about that myself. India is a rich musical culture, and I would love. I'm always encouraging my students to get more into all the myriad of Indian musics, African musics, Brazilian, South America. Everywhere, every region has such a rich history and something to add to our Western sensibilities. So it's especially with the rhythmic language of India. I mean, you already see it with a lot of people getting into Konakal and different things like that. And yeah, who knows with the microtonal thing, which you see in little spits and spurts. It'd be interesting to see how that started playing into popular music and what kind of effect that would really have. So it wasn't just the total bass nerds and drum nerds who are getting into the Konakal, but you start getting a little bit more of the Grammy nominated stuff as well. I wish I had a broader understanding of what kind of impact that would have, and I'm curious to hear it for myself.
Yeah, it is interesting hearing things bubble up in that way. There's an artist, Stromae, and you hear things like, oh yeah, I can definitely hear, he's unquestionably, in the pop vein, but you hear that flamenco aspect or a Brazilian music aspect or something like that coming through, and it's like, oh, but he did it in a way that wasn't just I'm aping this music, right? It's just kind of naturally seeping in, and I'm really excited about how much more of that is to come.
Right? Yeah. I was recently a drummer buddy of mine. We were on the road. He had just gotten back from a trip all over Europe. And he played me this little video he shot from backstage at a festival, and I think it was Paris. And there was this Hungarian vocal choir with a conductor and some instrumentalists. I mean, it was like 15, 20 people, and it was just the funkiest thing I'd ever heard. And then we're listening to it, and I'm like, that's like this whole section's in 13, then it goes to a 15 thing, and then there's all these metric modulations. But meanwhile, when you look off to the side of the video, you just see all these people at this outdoor music festival just boogieing their asses off. And I loved it. I'm like, yes, we need more of that, more,
That's cool.
more global influence of music, and just, like I said, good music is good music, and it resonates.
That's cool. That's cool. All right. So a couple more things. Bring it kind of back in to learning and developing. What's your practice environment like, and how do you structure your routine nowadays?
For the most days when I'm in my shed practicing, I'm generally working on music for a gig, something coming up that I want to be prepared for. But when I see that as separate from practicing.
Mhm.
When I'm practicing, my general routine has been for a long time to prioritize my weaknesses. Thinking about how I want to play and who I want to be when I grow up, as a musician, and looking at what those biggest gaps are, the thing that I wish I had more of, and prioritizing that thing and focusing on, the top ranking thing for maybe 60-70% of the time I have available, and then hitting a few other things just to touch on them a little bit before I run out of time. Right now for me is I'm kind of hooked on gospel music. and most of the players that I hear and I think, oh man, I wish I had that in my playing, are guys like Trey Reed, so I just been listening to a ton of not just the music that they play, but also trying to dig back through the influences and listen to some of the earlier stuff that they likely grew up with and what influenced them, kind of trying to dig back through time a little bit. So lately my whole thing has just been exploring and surfing classic gospel albums and just like learning little lines, learning little turnarounds that I hear that I like, and just, kind of playing along and trying to hear the stuff better.
Yeah, it's cool. So I lived in Dallas for a little while, and large gospel scene there, to say the least, right?
Right.
And it was just amazing. You're playing with these guys, and they're just on this like other level, right? In terms of, oh, let's throw in those substitutions. Yeah, I hear it like this. And then locally, that's like, oh, that's Kirk Franklin's like, oh, that's just Kirk. And sometimes they would have to go out outside of their area to get for the bigger gigs because they were so known locally, right?
Right.
And it's just like they're treasures, right? And I think that probably happens to a certain degree everywhere, right? And I've gone to Chicago and gone into the smallest kind of dive bars and heard someone performing, and wow, like, why isn't this the biggest national name, playing at, a 5,000 seat theater, right? Right.
Yeah, but that same dude is playing 3 to 5 nights a week in that town,
That's
just
right.
trying to make the ends meet. So for everybody there, it's just like, oh, it's Tuesday. Yeah, this guy plays, Tuesday night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. So you've had a relationship with Skjold basses now for a while. I don't know exactly how many years, but a while, we'll say. How did that come about?
Initially, it came about because actually in Dallas, I was passing through Dallas with Tony Furtado, who's a banjo and bottleneck slide guitarist. And at the time, Pete Skjold lived in Dallas, and he liked my playing, and he just swung by. He didn't know much about me at all. He just heard some clips on YouTube or something, and swung by and said, "Hey, if you want to check out any of my basses, I got a few in the car just to whatever." And I played them, and they were great. But I was using Zahn basses, and I loved my Zahns. And I said, "Oh, we forged a friendship, but it never went any further than that." a couple years went by, and although I really loved my Zons, I got really frustrated with the sound of graphite neck on the 6 string. My C string just always sounded way too brittle, way too thin. And Joe Zahn was just too busy to ever kind of futz with the bass and see if he could get it to sound like I wanted it to sound. And I happened to run into Pete Skjold somewhere. I don't even remember how we reconnected, but we reconnected and we're talking. And I mentioned that. I was like, hey, what do you know, not that I was trying to hit him up for basses or anything. I was just trying to get his opinion on how I could change that tonal quality. And he said, well, you know, I don't want to, you know, pilch you from the Joe or anything, but I got some stuff you could check out if you want to see what different things sound like. And I fell in love with a bass, basically. So I wound up, there's a few things I thought I could change this, I could change that. And Pete just built me a bass based on what I liked about this. And he had played my other basses, and he has this crazy ability to remember the feel and the vibe of people's instruments. And he remembered kind of how I had mine set up and how I liked them. So he built me something he thought I would like with the narrower spacing too. I used 16.5 millimeter spacing. And he just crushed it. You know, he knocked it out of the park. And as much as I felt bad and was afraid of ruining my relationship with Joe, which I didn't. We're still friends and everything. But I still feel awkward about it because he was so good to me and such a good guy. I just had to play the bass that spoke to me. Mm-hmm. And Pete, he's built me a handful of basses since then. I have 4 now. Every one of them was for a specific task, and Pete just has this ability. I can say, you know, I need something, you know, kind of P bass, but not just a P, you know, like, and I can use the weird, you know, like I want it to sound like chocolate raindrops. And he's like, oh, I know what you're talking about, you know, and he just, every time he just floors me. So I still have one of my Zahn fretlesses that I use a lot. That's my fretless bass usually for recording sessions. But I pretty much only play Pete's basses at this point. Yeah, we've been working together for, it's got to be over a decade now.
I think so, something like that, right? And I know that you've had you mentioned specific purpose built. You kind of developed that deeper, the Catacomb series, and then I think more recently was the
Greyling.
The Grin, yes, that's right.
Yeah, that one. I was passing through Ohio and had an extra day, and he's now in the middle of Ohio, so I just swung out, and you know, we hung out for it was actually 2 days or so. And I was, of course, you know, in his shop checking it. It was the first time I'd actually seen his shop, and I was playing everything that he had just finished building. And he's like, "Oh, check out this." He'd built one for himself, just a personal bass, not a model of anything, just something for him to play with the band that he plays with. And again, I was like, "Oh, God, all right. I need one of these now." And
it's our curse.
Yeah, I know. I was like, every time, damn you, Pete. So yeah, he wound up building me one slightly different than the one he had, more again tailor built towards a certain to fill a certain role in my professional life, day-to-day life. And yeah, basically that's become my daily bass.
Oh, wow.
And the chambered, this guy is the chambered 6-string. This is kind of my basically my jazz box. I play this on a lot of jazz gigs, or if it's a heavy reading gig, I like having the 6-string because you can play more in one range. And it records really well. So I use it on even, you know, 3-chord pop sessions. I've used it on that just because it sounds so good. And then if I need a little bit more of that P sound, I actually use the Greyling set up like I have a way of setting the tone so it kind of comes across like a P, and that sounds incredible too. And all of my basses are totally passive now and shorter scale than they used to be. And so they just, have these great natural qualities to them.
It's cool. Speaking of recording sessions, is there anything we can look for the coming year or so? Yeah.
Actually, with the trio that I played with at the Bass Bash, that came about when I got the Bass Bash offer. I was immediately thinking, oh, I should use my band from the albums, you know, and not all those guys were going to be at NAMM. And Bass Bash, not a paying gig, so I didn't want to shovel out a ton of money to fly everybody out and put them in Airbnbs or hotels. So I was trying to use guys who were going to be there anyway. Gender neutral guys, use people that were going to be there anyway. And went through a few different incarnations of different bands that I played with, and I was just doing a brunch gig with Charlie and Greg. Greg Goebel's piano player, Charlie Doggis, the drummer. Just a local brunch gig at a jazz club / kind of fine dining pizza joint in town, fancy pizza, called the 1905. And like we kind of finished the first set, and I was like, man, that was nice. You guys want to go to LA? And so I did that trio. So long story short, we started talking about some tunes and taking what approach, and I think we're going to record. I'm going to record a new trio record sometime here in the next month or two.
Awesome! Looking forward to hearing it.
Yeah, me too. It'll be nice, and it'll be my first record was a piano trio, for the most part, and I've always loved that thing. The sound of a bass and a piano together has always kind of hit me, and with the right drummer. Charlie is one. It can really be nice. I mean, yeah, we've thought about the approach and what tunes we have that might work, what other tunes we could borrow from other places, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing that again.
Cool. Well, looking forward to both hearing this coming out and of course seeing you the next time we're in the same area. Always enjoy your performances and your albums. And just wanted to thank you for your time.
Man, thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure, and it was great meeting you at the Bash. And yeah, I'm sure it's inevitable. I'll see you again down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me know if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like it. All right, thanks for watching, and take it easy.